The Dark Secrets of Ballycarrick, a Hercule Poirot mystery, Part 1. Arrival at Ballycarrick train slowed with a reluctant sigh, as though even the iron engine sensed that Ballycarrick was not a place one arrived at lightly. Hercule Poirot, seated alone in a first-class compartment, adjusted his immaculate mustache with delicate precision and glanced through the window. Gray skies hung low over the Irish countryside, heavy with mist and unspoken things. Rolling green hills stretched endlessly, broken only by stone walls and the occasional twisted tree that looked as though it had learned long ago to endure rather than to flourish. Poirot frowned, just slightly. "Mon ami," he murmured to himself. When a place looks so peaceful, it is often because it hides its troubles very well. The invitation had been unexpected. Lady Moira Ashcroft of Ballycarrick Manor had written to him in an elegant but strangely anxious hand, requesting his presence not for a crime already committed, but for one she feared was inevitable. Such requests always intrigued Poirot more than those that arrived too late. The train came to a halt with a sharp jolt. Ballycarrick Station. The platform was nearly empty. A single porter stood near the edge, his cap pulled low, his eyes sharp and watchful. There was no welcoming committee, no sign of anticipation, only silence and the faint cry of a distant crow. Poirot stepped down carefully, his polished shoes touching the damp stone. He surveyed the station with professional curiosity. Small places, he knew, were never simple. They were like sealed rooms of the human soul containing everything, yet revealing nothing. A tall man approached, removing his hat politely. "Mr. Hercule Poirot?" he asked. "Yes," Poirot replied. "And you are?" "Seamus O'Connell, Madam's driver. I'm to take you to Ballycarrick Manor." Poirot nodded. "'Tis been." "Let us go, then." The drive to the manor took nearly half an hour. The road wound through narrow lanes bordered by hedges and ancient stone fences. The village itself appeared briefly, a cluster of cottages, a church, a small pub before vanishing behind another bend in the road. Poirot noticed everything. The way curtains twitched as the car passed. The way conversation outside the pub stopped abruptly. The way even the dogs seemed to watch him with suspicion. "Tell me, Monsieur O'Connell," Poirot said casually, "is Ballycarrick always so quiet?" The driver hesitated. "Quiet, yes," he said slowly. "But peaceful?" "That depends on what you mean by peaceful." Poirot smiled faintly. Silence, he had learned, often spoke louder than words. Ballycarrick Manor soon emerged from the mist, a large stone house perched on a low rise, its dark windows staring outward like unblinking eyes. Ivy crept along its walls, and the grounds, though well-kept, carried an air of restrained gloom. Poirot felt it immediately. This house was heavy with memory. Lady Moira Ashcroft awaited him in the drawing room. She rose as he entered, a tall woman in her late 50s, elegant but visibly strained. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and deeply troubled. "Mr. Poirot," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming." "The pleasure is mine, madame," Poirot replied, bowing slightly, "though I sense this is not a social visit." A flicker crossed her face. "No," she said quietly, "it is not." Tea was served, but Lady Ashcroft barely touched her cup. Poirot observed her hands nervous, restless, betraying what her voice tried to conceal. "You wrote that you feared a crime," Poirot said gently. "Fear must have a cause." Lady Ashcroft rose and walked to the window, gazing out at the mist-covered grounds. "This house," she said, "has never forgotten its sins." Poirot leaned back slightly. He did not interrupt. People revealed more when allowed to speak in their own time. "There are secrets here," she continued. "Old ones, buried ones. And recently, they have begun to stir." "Ah," Poirot murmured. "The past, madame, it is very stubborn. It refuses to stay dead." She turned to face him. "I believe someone in this house is in danger," she said. "Or, worse, someone is planning murder." Poirot's eyes sharpened, though his expression remained calm. "Do you suspect anyone in particular?" Lady Ashcroft hesitated too long. "That," she said softly, "is exactly the problem." That evening, Poirot was shown to his room, a comfortable chamber overlooking the rear gardens. As he unpacked, he reflected on what he had already learned. A fearful hostess. A silent village. A house burdened by history. And not yet a crime. Which, Poirot knew, was often the most dangerous moment of all. As night fell over Ballycarrick Manor, a distant clock struck 9. Somewhere in the house, a door closed quietly. Somewhere else, a voice lowered itself to a whisper. Poirot stood by the window, gazing into the darkness. "Patience," he said softly. "The truth always announces itself. One must only listen." Outside, the mist thickened. And in Ballycarrick, the dark secrets began to awaken. Part 2. The manor and its inhabitants' mourning came slowly to Ballycarrick Manor, as though the house itself were reluctant to wake. A pale light filtered through the mist, turning the gardens into vague shapes rather than living things. Hercule Poirot rose early, as was his habit, and rang for breakfast to be brought to his room. While he ate with careful deliberation, he reflected on Lady Ashcroft's words from the previous evening. Fear without clarity was always significant. It meant the danger was not imagined. It was merely unrecognized. At precisely 9 o'clock, Poirot made his way downstairs to the drawing room, where Lady Ashcroft had arranged for him to meet the other occupants of the manor. They were already gathered. Poirot paused briefly at the doorway, allowing his sharp eyes to take in the scene as a whole. He believed firmly in first impressions, not because they were always correct, but because they revealed what people wished to project. Lady Moira Ashcroft stood near the fireplace, composed but tense. Beside her sat her nephew, Edward Ashcroft, a man of about 35, handsome in a careless way, his expression faintly bored. He rose halfway from his chair, nodded politely, and sat again. Across from him stood Clara Ashcroft, Edward's younger sister. She was slim, dark-haired, and observant, her eyes following Poirot with open curiosity rather than suspicion. Near the window was Gerald Whitcomb, a family friend and financial advisor, thin, precise, and impeccably dressed. His posture was stiff, his smile practiced. Finally, slightly apart from the others, stood Mrs. Kathleen Byrne, Lady Ashcroft's long-serving housekeeper. Her face was lined, her gaze steady and unflinching. She looked like a woman who had seen too much to be easily surprised. Poirot entered fully. "Good morning," he said pleasantly. "I trust I am not late." "Not at all," Lady Ashcroft replied. "Mr. Poirot, may I introduce?" "Please," Poirot interrupted gently. "There is no need. I have already made your acquaintances." Several of them exchanged startled glances. Poirot smiled. Not by name, perhaps, but by nature. Edward Ashcroft laughed shortly. "That's rather impressive." "Not at all," Poirot said. "People announce themselves constantly. One must only observe." They seated themselves, and tea was poured. Poirot spoke little at first, encouraging conversation to flow naturally. He listened as Edward complained lightly about the isolation of Ballycarrick, as Clara spoke warmly of the village children she taught, and as Whitcomb discussed estate matters with careful neutrality. But beneath the surface politeness, Poirot detected tension. Edward's laughter was too quick. Clara's warmth carried an edge of protectiveness. Whitcomb's calm felt rehearsed. Mrs. Byrne said almost nothing, but missed nothing. "You have lived here long, Mrs. Byrne?" Poirot asked suddenly. "All my life, sir," she replied. "And my mother before me." "Then you know the manor well." "I know its walls," she said evenly. "And what they keep." A silence followed. Lady Ashcroft cleared her throat. "Mr. Poirot has come as a guest," she said, "but also as a friend." Poirot inclined his head. "And friends, madame, sometimes ask inconvenient questions." Edward shifted in his seat. "Is there something wrong with the house?" Poirot looked at him thoughtfully. "That depends, monsieur. Do you believe houses can remember?" Edward frowned. "That's a strange question." "Not at all," Poirot replied. "Memory shapes behavior. People, places, families." Clara spoke quickly. "You mean the past?" "Yes," Poirot said softly. "I mean the past." Later that morning, Poirot requested a tour of the manor. Lady Ashcroft agreed, though her reluctance was evident. The house was large, but not grand in the modern sense. Its corridors were narrow, its ceilings high, its doors heavy. Portraits lined the walls, stern men and distant women, all bearing the unmistakable Ashcroft gaze. Poirot paused before one painting. A man with sharp features and cold eyes. "That is my husband," Lady Ashcroft said quietly. "Patrick Ashcroft?" Poirot studied the portrait. "He is deceased?" "Yes," she replied. 10 years ago. Suddenly?" She hesitated. "Unexpectedly." Poirot nodded. He would ask no more for now. They continued through the house. Poirot noted staircases that creaked unevenly, doors that closed too softly, and rooms whose arrangement suggested recent changes. In one corridor, he stopped abruptly. "Someone was arguing here last night," he said. Lady Ashcroft stiffened. "How could you know that?" Poirot gestured to a small vase on a side table. "It has been moved, recently, in anger." Her silence confirmed it. That afternoon, Poirot took a short walk through the village. The people greeted him politely, but with reserve. He felt their curiosity and their fear. At the pub, conversation stopped when he entered. At the churchyard, an old man crossed himself when Poirot asked about the manor. "There's bad luck there," the man muttered. "Always has been." "Bad luck," Poirot repeated. "Or bad deeds?" The man looked away. As evening fell, Poirot returned to the manor with a growing certainty. This was not a house waiting for tragedy. It was a house preparing for it, and among its inhabitants, someone was watching. Someone was calculating. Someone was very close to acting. Poirot stood alone in the drawing room, gazing at the fire. "Courage," he murmured. "The truth is impatient. It will not wait long." Upstairs, a door opened softly. And somewhere in Ballycarrick Manor, a decision was made. Part 3. A crime in the night settled heavily over Ballycarrick Manor, pressing against its stone walls like an unwelcome guest. The wind stirred the trees in the grounds, and their branches scraped softly against the windows, producing a sound that was neither quite natural nor entirely comforting. Hercule Poirot prepared for bed with his usual precision. He brushed his mustache carefully, laid out his clothes for the morning, and extinguished the lamp at exactly 11 o'clock. Yet he did not sleep at once. The house was too awake. Poirot listened. Footsteps moved somewhere below, slow, deliberate, then hurried. A door opened, closed again. Voices murmured briefly, then fell silent. The manor breathed uneasily, as though holding something back. At 11:30, Poirot heard it. A sharp sound. Not loud, but final. He sat up at once. "A door," he murmured. "Closed with purpose." Poirot rose, slipped on his dressing gown, and stepped into the corridor. Other doors were opening now. A candle flickered at the far end of the hall. Mrs. Byrne emerged from her room, her face pale but composed. "You heard it too," she said quietly. "Yes," Poirot replied. "We should wake Lady Ashcroft." They had gone now. More than a few steps when a scream shattered the silence. It came from the east wing, the door to Gerald Whitcomb's study was locked. Lady Ashcroft stood trembling beside it, Clara clutching her arm. Edward paced the corridor, his face flushed, his movements frantic. "I tell you, it's locked," Edward said. "From the inside." Poirot examined the door calmly. "Locked doors," he said, "are often very interesting." Mrs. Byrne produced a key ring. "This opens every room but the private suites," she said. She tried the key. It did not turn. Poirot knelt, examining the lock closely. "Indeed," he said. "Bolted from within." Edward laughed harshly. "Then what are we standing around for? Break it down." It took 2 men, the driver, O'Connell, summoned hastily from the servants' quarters, and Edward himself to force the door open. The sight inside silenced them all. Gerald Whitcomb lay sprawled beside his desk. One arm twisted beneath him, his glasses shattered on the floor. A heavy brass paperweight lay near his head, darkened with blood. He was quite dead. Poirot stepped forward slowly, his eyes scanning the room with methodical care. "No sign of struggle," he murmured. "Interesting." Lady Ashcroft sank into a chair. "Gerald, oh God!" Clara turned away, her face ashen. Edward stared at the body, then at the door. "But how?" No one could have left the room. Poirot did not answer immediately. He examined the windows, all closed, all latched. The fireplace was cold. The furniture was undisturbed. A perfect locked room. Mon ami, Poirot said at last. One must not confuse impossibility with improbability. The local police arrived just after dawn. Inspector Declan Murphy, a solid man with tired eyes and an air of practical skepticism, listened patiently as Poirot explained the situation. A locked room, you say? Murphy repeated. They always are. Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, but this one truly was. Murphy examined the study. No sign of forced entry. Weapon belongs to the room. Victim alone. That narrows it down. To everyone, Poirot corrected gently. Murphy raised an eyebrow. You believe it's someone in the house? I am certain of it. Murphy sighed. Then we'll begin with the obvious. The questioning began. Edward Ashcroft admitted he had argued with Whitcomb earlier that evening. About money, Edward said bluntly. He was always meddling in things that weren't his business. Such as? Poirot asked. Edward hesitated. The estate. My aunt's will. Poirot noted the hesitation carefully. Clara claimed she had been in her room. Reading. Mrs. Byrne confirmed that she had seen Clara go upstairs early, though she could not say whether she had remained there. Lady Ashcroft spoke quietly. Gerald was concerned, she said. He believed something from the past was about to come to light. What thing? Poirot asked. She closed her eyes. I don't know. Or perhaps I do not wish to. Poirot did not press her. Later, alone in the study, Poirot examined the room once more. He knelt beside the desk, noting a faint scuff mark near the rug. He examined the desk drawers. One was locked, but unlocked easily with a key found in Whitcomb's pocket. Inside lay papers, financial records, and one letter, torn in half. Poirot read it carefully. It spoke of guilt, of truth, and of a meeting planned for that very night. Poirot folded the letter thoughtfully. So, he murmured, you knew, monsieur, and knowing was fatal. As he stood, Poirot noticed something else, a faint smell, almost imperceptible. Oil. He smiled sadly. The door was locked, he said softly. Yes, but not in the way they believe. That evening, the household gathered once more in the drawing room, shaken and silent. A murder had been committed. The house had crossed a line from fear to fact, and Poirot knew, with absolute certainty, that the killer was still very close, watching, waiting, perhaps even relieved. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back and gazed at the assembled faces. This, he said quietly, was not a crime of passion. Several people looked up sharply. It was a crime of design. The fire crackled. Outside. The mist returned to Ballycarrick, and the game had truly begun. Asterisk. Part 4. Lies beneath politeness. The days following Gerald Whitcomb's death passed under a heavy cloud. Ballycarrick Manor, once merely uneasy, now felt actively hostile, its corridors echoing with suspicion, its rooms thick with unspoken accusation. Hercule Poirot observed it all with quiet intensity. Grief, he knew, revealed truth just as effectively as fear. Inspector Murphy remained at the manor, turning the drawing room into a temporary headquarters. Statements were taken again, more carefully this time, and Poirot was invited, informally but inevitably, to listen. Edward Ashcroft sat stiffly in his chair, irritation written plainly across his face. You're asking the same questions again, he snapped. I've told you everything. Inspector Murphy folded his arms. Humor me. Edward exhaled sharply. Yes, I argued with Whitcomb. Yes, it was about money. But arguing doesn't make a man a murderer. No, Poirot said mildly. But it does make him angry. Edward shot him a look. Are you accusing me? Poirot smiled gently. I am accusing no one. I am observing. Edward said nothing more. Clara Ashcroft was next. She answered calmly, but Poirot noticed how carefully she chose her words. You were fond of Mr. Whitcomb? Poirot asked. I respected him, she replied. He helped my aunt. But you disagreed with him, Poirot said. A pause brief, but unmistakable. He was insistent, Clara said. About matters best left alone, such as the past? Poirot asked softly. Her eyes flickered. The past rarely stays buried here. Poirot inclined his head. That was not a denial. Lady Ashcroft's interview was the most difficult. She sat very straight, her hands folded, her voice controlled to the point of fragility. Gerald believed someone here was living a lie, she said. He thought exposure was necessary. And you? Poirot asked. I feared it, she admitted. Truth can destroy as easily as it can heal. Poirot studied her face. Did you know what he intended to reveal? She shook her head, but too quickly. Mrs. Byrne was last. You were awake when the noise occurred, Poirot said. I am a light sleeper, she replied evenly. And loyal, Poirot added. To the house, Mrs. Byrne said. Not always to the people in it. Poirot's eyes sharpened. That is an important distinction. She met his gaze steadily. Some secrets protect, others poison. Poirot nodded. And which was this one? Mrs. Byrne said nothing. Asterisk. That afternoon, Poirot returned to the study alone. He examined the lock again, then the hinges, then the rug. The faint scuff mark he had noticed earlier troubled him. It suggested movement, careful movement by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Poirot also noticed something else. The clock on the mantel. It was 5 minutes slow. Ah, Poirot murmured. Time always the most cooperative accomplice. Later, Poirot took tea with Clara in the small sitting room overlooking the gardens. You teach the village children, Poirot said conversationally. Yes, she replied. They trust easily. And adults? Poirot asked. She smiled faintly. Adults pretend. Poirot leaned forward. Mademoiselle, were you afraid of Gerald Whitcomb? She hesitated. I was afraid of what he knew, she said quietly. Poirot did not press further. He had learned enough. That evening, Inspector Murphy approached Poirot privately. You have a theory, Murphy said. I can see it in your face. Poirot clasped his hands. I have several. Most of them are wrong. And the right one? Poirot smiled. It concerns politeness. Murphy frowned. Politeness? Yes, Poirot said. When people are polite while lying, they reveal more than when they shout the truth. Murphy sighed. You're saying the killer is calm. I am saying, Poirot replied, that the killer is controlled. As night fell once more over Ballycarrick Manor, the household settled into uneasy silence. Doors were locked. Lights were dimmed. Trust was non-existent. Poirot stood at the top of the stairs, listening. Someone moved softly below. Someone paused. Someone waited. Poirot's eyes narrowed. The mask slips, he murmured. Always. And somewhere in the manor, another lie was being prepared, one that would not hold for long. Asterisk. Part 5. The buried past of Ballycarrick Manor had changed. It was not merely the presence of death that altered it. Hercule Poirot reflected, but the awakening of memory. The house no longer pretended to sleep. It watched. It listened. It remembered. Poirot stood in the library that morning, running his fingers lightly along the spines of old books. Many were ledgers, journals, and family histories, records of generations who had lived, prospered, and quietly erased inconvenient truths. The past, Poirot murmured, is very patient, but it always demands payment. Inspector Murphy arrived shortly after breakfast, bringing news from the village. People are talking, Murphy said grimly. They always do after a murder. Old stories are coming up. Poirot turned. Stories are facts that have learned to whisper. Murphy hesitated. There was a death here, years ago, before Lady Ashcroft's husband passed away. Poirot's eyes sharpened. Tell me. A young woman, Murphy continued. Name of Eileen Doyle. Worked briefly at the manor. Left suddenly. Later found dead near the cliffs. Ruled an accident. Poirot was silent for a moment. And now, he said slowly, someone wishes to revisit that conclusion. Murphy nodded. Whitcomb was asking questions about her. Poirot closed his eyes briefly. The pattern was forming. Later that day, Poirot requested access to Lady Ashcroft's private papers. She agreed reluctantly, watching him with a mixture of fear and resignation. "You believe this began long ago," she said. "I believe," Poirot replied gently, "that it never ended." Among the papers, Poirot found correspondence dating back more than 15 years. Letters written in different hands, some formal, some emotional, all circling the same subject: money, legitimacy, inheritance. One name appeared again and again: Eileen Doyle. Poirot examined a faded photograph tucked between documents. A young woman stared back at him, pretty, serious, and unmistakably out of place among the Ashcrofts. She did not belong, Poirot murmured, and that made her dangerous. That evening, Poirot sought out Mrs. Byrne. They spoke in the kitchen, away from listening ears. Mrs. Byrne's hands were steady as she prepared tea, but her eyes betrayed unease. "You knew Eileen Doyle," Poirot said quietly. Mrs. Byrne stopped. "I knew her," she said after a moment. "She was kind and frightened." "Of whom?" Mrs. Byrne looked toward the ceiling. "Of this house." Poirot nodded. "Did she threaten anyone?" "No," Mrs. Byrne said firmly. "She wanted the truth. That was enough." Poirot leaned closer. "And the truth was?" Mrs. Byrne closed her eyes. "She was carrying a child." Poirot did not react outwardly, but his mind moved swiftly. "The father?" Mrs. Byrne's voice dropped. "Patrick Ashcroft?" Poirot exhaled softly. "Ah." Later, Poirot confronted Lady Ashcroft not harshly, but with quiet inevitability. "You knew," he said. Lady Ashcroft's composure shattered. "Yes," she whispered. "I knew. Patrick swore it was a mistake, that it would destroy us all if it came out." "And Eileen Doyle?" Poirot asked. "She was paid to leave," Lady Ashcroft said bitterly. "But she refused." Poirot's voice was gentle. "And then she died." Lady Ashcroft covered her face. "They said it was an accident." Poirot did not contradict her. Accidents, he knew, were often convenient. Edward Ashcroft reacted very differently when Poirot raised the subject. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "Ancient history." "History," Poirot said calmly. "As children." Edward froze. Poirot watched him carefully. "You knew about Eileen Doyle." Edward's jaw tightened. "I knew rumors. And the child?" Edward laughed harshly. "There was no child." Poirot said nothing. Silence, after all, was far more revealing. Clara Ashcroft, however, broke down when Poirot spoke to her alone. "She deserved better," Clara said tearfully. "They all did." "They?" Poirot asked. "Eileen." "And the baby?" Clara whispered. Poirot felt a quiet certainty settle over him. "You helped her," he said. "Yes," Clara admitted. "I tried, but it was too late." That night, Poirot returned once more to Whitcomb's study. He placed the torn letter on the desk and reread it carefully. Whitcomb had known everything. The affair, the child, the hush money, the falsified records. And he had intended to reveal it. Poirot replaced the letter thoughtfully. "Blackmail," he murmured. "Or justice. Sometimes the line is very thin." Outside, the wind howled across the grounds, echoing against the cliffs where Eileen Doyle had died. Poirot stood very still. "One secret," he said softly, "has already killed once. And now it has killed again." But he knew something else too. The truth Whitcomb had threatened to reveal was not yet complete. Someone else was connected to Eileen Doyle. Someone still alive. Someone who had decided that silence was worth killing for. Poirot extinguished the lamp. The past of Ballycarrick had risen, and it was not finished. Part 6. False. Clues and clever deception. The morning after his long contemplation of Ballycarrick's past, Hercule Poirot descended into the drawing room with a calm that belied the storm he anticipated. The household had grown quieter, more constrained, as though each person sensed the scrutiny Poirot now brought to every gesture, every glance. Inspector Murphy greeted him with a nod. "The servants report more oddities," he said. "Footsteps at night, doors left open that were previously closed. And someone no one claims it has been moving papers in Whitcomb's study." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Ah, monsieur, the true beauty of crime is not its act, but its presentation." The clever criminal loves to lead us astray. Murphy frowned. I take it you suspect deliberate misdirection? Exactament, Poirot said. One must never accept appearances at their face value. One must always follow the little gray cells. The first interrogations of the day proved illuminating. Edward Ashcroft, on the surface cooperative, displayed subtle inconsistencies. He claimed to have spent the night reading in his room. Yet Poirot noted faint impressions of mud on the parquet. Fresh to have been there hours earlier. Clara, still fragile from the revelations of Eileen Doyle, insisted she had remained in her bedroom writing letters. Her hands, however, betrayed nervous tension. One small cut on her finger hinted at hurried handling of paper, perhaps the torn letter Poirot had discovered earlier. Poirot's observations grew more intricate when he examined the library. Books had been moved, papers shuffled, a quill placed conspicuously on a blotter. All these acts were designed to communicate, yet not to clarify a message from a careful manipulator. In the afternoon, Poirot called for a private discussion with Mrs. Byrne. Madame, he began, there is much you have not said. You know more than you admit. The house listens, but I also listen. Mrs. Byrne's face remained composed, yet her eyes betrayed a flicker of concern. I serve this house, she said, and I have always protected it. But even I cannot shield it from some truths. Poirot leaned in, noting every micro-expression. And yet, he said softly, you do not act against the guilty? I act only when necessary, she replied. There is a time for truth and a time for silence. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. He suspected she was withholding precisely the information that could prevent further tragedy. That evening, the household gathered once more, ostensibly for dinner. But the tension was palpable. Each glance, each polite comment, each measured smile seemed charged with hidden meaning. Poirot chose to speak first, casually addressing the gathering. Tonight, I wish to discuss Mr. Whitcomb, he began, his tone mild. Not to judge him, but to understand what he sought to uncover. Edward bristled. We know enough. Must we dissect the past endlessly? Ah, monsieur, Poirot said gently, but the past never truly dies. It lingers in gestures and letters and silences. Clara's fingers tightened around her napkin. It's painful, she whispered. Yes, Poirot said. Pain is the language of truth. And yet, some prefer deception. Later, Poirot returned to Whitcomb's study, alone, and examined the desk with meticulous care. He noted a footprint near the corner rug, small, feminine, almost imperceptible. Not Clara's, he was certain. Not Lady Ashcroft's. It suggested a visitor, perhaps at the time of the murder, attempting to mask her presence. Poirot examined the papers again. Among them, a carefully hidden note obviously intended to mislead investigators. It suggested an argument over money as the motive, a classic diversion. But the cleverest criminal, Poirot murmured, does not merely mislead. They arrange the pieces so that attention is drawn away from the true crime. He looked out the window. In the distance, the cliffs where Eileen Doyle had died were partially visible through the fog. The past, still unresolved, loomed over the present. Poirot spent the next day methodically following these trails of deception. He visited each room, spoke to servants in passing, examined letters, and listened to conversations carefully. Every action seemed staged, every remark calculated. By late afternoon, he called Inspector Murphy again. Monsieur, he said, the clues you trust most are false. They point to greed, to revenge, but they conceal something far more precise. Murphy sighed. So, we're chasing shadows? Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, but shadows are informative, yes? A clever shadow reveals the light that casts it. As evening fell, Poirot returned to the drawing room. Lady Ashcroft, her composure now fragile, asked softly, Have you learned anything? Much, Poirot replied. And yet, the killer has not revealed themselves. But they have left signs. Subtle, deliberate, clever. They wish us to believe we are mistaken. Clara sat beside her mother, pale but attentive. Do you know who it is? She whispered. Poirot did not answer. He merely studied the assembled faces, observing reactions, measuring hesitation. and noting the smallest tremor in the hand or flicker of the eyes. Somewhere among them, the truth waited. And Poirot knew that the next move by the guilty party would be decisive. Outside, the wind swept across Ballycarrick Manor once more. The house seemed to sigh. The game, Poirot knew, was far from over, but the killer's mask was beginning to slip. Asterisk. Part 7. Poirot's little gray cells. The morning was heavy with fog at Ballycarrick Manor, and Hercule Poirot stood silently by the window of the drawing room, gazing out at the obscured gardens. The mist seemed to mirror the state of the household itself, every corner of the manor hiding secrets, every smile veiling intention. Poirot's mind, however, was anything but foggy. His little gray cells were alert, connecting threads invisible to everyone else. Ah, he murmured softly. The human mind is a labyrinth. One must follow carefully or be lost entirely. The events of the past week, the locked room murder of Gerald Whitcomb, the resurfacing of the Eileen Doyle affair, the subtle misdirection of clues all now coalesced in Poirot's mind. Each suspect had a story, but their stories were layered with artifice. Politeness, nervous gestures, subtle contradictions all revealed far more than their words. He began with Edward Ashcroft. The eldest Ashcroft heir had been brash, argumentative, and quick to anger. Yet Poirot detected nervousness in his movements and inconsistencies in his alibi. Edward's outward arrogance masked fear, the fear of discovery. Clara Ashcroft, delicate and emotionally vulnerable, had revealed more than she intended about Eileen Doyle and the child. She had been careful, yes, but there were tremors in her hands. Micro-expressions of guilt or protective concern that could not be faked. Lady Ashcroft herself, elegant and poised, was concealing a long-held anguish. Her role in covering the past and controlling what could be revealed had placed her in a morally ambiguous position, one where she might even sanction extreme measures to protect the family. Finally, Mrs. Kathleen Byrne, loyal yet watchful, appeared calm and neutral, but Poirot had long suspected that she held the keys to truths too dangerous for the other residents to handle. She was a guardian of secrets, capable of action if the house demanded it. Poirot turned his attention to the physical evidence. The study, with its locked door and overturned papers, was the stage for the first act. The footprint near the corner rug suggested deliberate movement, not hasty entry. The torn letter revealed that Whitcomb knew the past his murder was not impulsive, but carefully timed to prevent revelation. The misplaced objects, subtly arranged to mislead investigators, confirmed the killer's cunning. The clue about the clock being 5 minutes slow was almost comically meticulous, a trap to divert attention, to mislead those who did not think beyond the obvious. Poirot whispered to himself, these are not mistakes. They are the strokes of a deliberate hand. That afternoon, Poirot conducted his own private observations of the household. He watched how Edward and Clara interacted. He noted how Lady Ashcroft moved through the halls, carrying herself with the precision of someone guarding fragile information. He even examined the servants, looking for inconsistencies in speech or gesture. Every word, every glance, every hesitated movement was a clue, and Poirot began constructing the mental map that would soon reveal the unseen hand behind Whitcomb's death. Poirot called Inspector Murphy to a private room. "Monsieur," he said, "the killer is not merely guilty of murder. They are orchestrating a performance. Every action, every deception is intended to mislead." Murphy frowned. "And you know this how?" "Observation," Poirot replied. "Logic, psychology, human weakness. The killer counts on fear, habit, and pride to disguise intent. But the little gray cells see differently." By evening, Poirot felt ready to test a hypothesis. He gathered the family in the drawing room once again, ostensibly to discuss estate matters, but with a far more precise goal: to observe their reactions under pressure. He began with casual remarks. He mentioned Whitcomb's work, his questions, his concerns about the past. He noted who flinched, who adjusted their posture, and who remained perfectly composed. Then he moved to more pointed topics: the history of Eileen Doyle, the payments made to silence her, and the mysterious child who had been born in secrecy. Every mention produced subtle reactions. A flicker of the eyes, a twitch of the lips, a sudden tightening of the hands. Poirot's mind raced. "Ah," he said silently, "the truth is a creature that cannot hide forever. It trembles, it flinches, it betrays itself." That night, alone in his room, Poirot reviewed his observations. Edward, outwardly aggressive, inwardly fearful. Clara, fragile, protective, emotionally conflicted. Lady Ashcroft, poised, but morally compromised. Mrs. Byrne, loyal, capable, potentially decisive. Poirot leaned back in his chair. All have motives, yes, but one is the architect. One directs the narrative. The rest are actors in a play they do not fully understand. He examined Whitcomb's study once more, imagining the killer's movements, their planning, their careful attention to detail. Poirot's mind traced each step, each concealment, each misdirection. "The solution," he murmured, "is not in what is obvious. It is in what they wish us to ignore." Outside, the fog rolled over the manor once again. Ballycarrick's cliffs loomed in the distance, silent witnesses to past sins. Within the house, shadows deepened, secrets waited, and the murderer so certain of impunity remained unaware that Poirot's little gray cells were already closing in. The stage was set for revelation. The web of deception had begun to unravel, thread by thread, and Poirot knew, with absolute certainty, that the next move by the guilty party or by fate would be decisive. Asterisk. Part 8. A second shocking revelation. Section 1. The morning fog clung stubbornly to the grounds of Ballycarrick Manor. It seeped through the ivy, curling around the gnarled branches of the ancient trees, and crept under the manor doors as if it had something to conceal, something it wished to hide until the proper moment. Hercule Poirot rose early, as always, but today there was an unusual tension in his movements. He did not merely observe. He felt. The atmosphere was thick, as if the very walls of the manor were holding their breath. After weeks of subtle clues, half-truths, and misdirection, Poirot sensed that the game was about to escalate. That he began his morning in the library, reviewing his notes once more. He had compiled meticulous observations about each member of the household, their gestures, their hesitations, the unspoken emotions that betrayed truths they would never voluntarily share. Yet something eluded him, a subtle pattern that he could not yet place. The first clue arrived without warning. A loud knock at the front door startled the household. It was unusual. Visitors rarely came to Ballycarrick, and no announcement had been expected. Poirot himself opened the door. Outside stood a young man, unfamiliar to all, shivering in the damp mist. "Mr. Hercule Poirot?" the man asked. His voice trembled. I must speak to you immediately. It concerns Gerald Whitcomb." Poirot studied the man's face carefully. Fear, yes, but also a deep knowledge of events unspoken. This was no ordinary visitor. He invited the man inside and gestured toward the drawing room. Once seated, the man introduced himself. "My name is Jonathan Kearney," he said. "I worked with Mr. Whitcomb on several matters. There is something you must know about the past, about Eileen Doyle, and..." His voice faltered, and he swallowed hard. Poirot, with his habitual calm, leaned forward. "Take your time, monsieur. Speak slowly and precisely." Kearney exhaled. "There was another person involved," he said. "Someone no one has suspected. Eileen Doyle. She had confided to me. She feared him. She called him the Shadow of Ballycarrick." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "The Shadow of Ballycarrick?" Kearney nodded. "Yes, he was never supposed to be seen. He watched. He waited. And Gerald Whitcomb discovered his identity. That is why he was killed." At that moment, Lady Ashcroft entered the room. Her face was pale, almost translucent in the morning light. "What is this about?" she asked, her voice steady but fragile. Poirot gestured to Kearney. "Monsieur Kearney has revealed new information, madame. Information about a presence in the manor that no one suspected." Lady Ashcroft's lips parted in shock. She seemed to absorb the revelation slowly, as though it were too vast, too incomprehensible to take in at once. Edward Ashcroft entered moments later. His expression was impatient. "What is going on?" he demanded. Poirot chose his words carefully. "A revelation, monsieur, concerning your late friend Gerald Whitcomb. It appears the danger extends further than we imagined." Edward's brow furrowed. "Danger? Are you suggesting another attempt?" Poirot inclined his head. "It is possible, and it is urgent that we proceed with caution." Poirot requested that the household remain together in the drawing room. While they gathered, he observed every minute gesture. Clara's hands were trembling. Mrs. Burns' posture was taut. Lady Ashcroft's eyes darted toward the hallway, as if anticipating a threat. Poirot's instincts confirmed what he had suspected. The killer had not acted alone, nor had the danger ended with Whitcomb's death. He turned his attention to Jonathan Kearney. "Tell me everything, from the beginning," he said. "Do not omit a single detail. The truth, no matter how terrible, must emerge." Kearney hesitated. "Very well. Gerald had been investigating a secret from years ago, something that Lady Ashcroft may already know. There were payments made to silence people. But there was also a man, a shadowed figure, someone who moved through Ballycarrick unseen. Eileen Doyle feared him. Gerald confronted him. And now—" His voice faltered. "Now?" Poirot prompted. "Now. He has not been idle. He is still here." Poirot leaned back in thought. The implications were staggering. Not only was there a murderer among them, but another hidden participant, a silent, watching presence whose motives and identity remained unknown. Part 9. The gathering of truth. The manor was hushed that evening, though not in the ordinary way. Ballycarrick Manor had learned silence as a companion over the past weeks, but tonight it was a charged, expectant quiet. Each footstep, each creak of the ancient floorboards, seemed amplified in the hushed corridors. Shadows gathered in corners, pooling like ink, and the air smelled faintly of damp wood and the residue of old secrets finally surfacing. Hercule Poirot stood in the drawing room, facing the household. It was a rare moment for him to assemble them all together, not merely as a guest, but as an arbiter of truth. The air was thick with anticipation. Each member of the Ashcroft household had been summoned for one purpose: clarity, exposure, and justice. Lady Ashcroft sat stiffly in her chair, a porcelain mask of composure over a sea of unease. Clara Ashcroft's hands trembled, not from weakness, but from the intensity of the forthcoming revelations. Edward Ashcroft looked defiant, his eyes darting toward Poirot as though ready to challenge him at any moment. Mrs. Kathleen Byrne remained quiet and composed, but Poirot's eyes, trained to detect subtleties invisible to most, noticed the faint tension in her jaw, the telltale sign of a woman bracing for a moral reckoning. Poirot's small, precise fingers steepled in front of him. He began softly, carefully, deliberately. "Ms. Amos," he said, "we have all gathered here for a single purpose: to unmask truth, to lift the veil that has hidden the darkest secrets of Ballycarrick Manor." A shiver passed through the room. Even Edward, usually impervious to theatrics, seemed slightly unsettled. Poirot continued. "It is often said that houses hold memory. They do not merely shelter. They observe, they record, and they whisper. And this house," he gestured toward the walls, his gaze sharp, "has observed much that you would have preferred to forget." Lady Ashcroft's eyes widened slightly, her composure cracking, but Poirot did not pause. "The death of Mr. Gerald Whitcomb," he said, "was not an accident, nor was it a crime of passion in its ordinary sense. It was a murder meticulously planned, a crime of precision, guided by knowledge of human nature, and executed with cunning." Edward Ashcroft shifted uneasily. "Are you saying someone here?" "Yes," Poirot interrupted, softly but firmly. "Someone among you deliberately ended Mr. Whitcomb's life. But that is not all. There is more to the story than a single act of violence. There are layers, and it is the layers that I now intend to reveal." Poirot turned first to Edward Ashcroft. "Monsieur Edward," he began, "you are a man of influence and pride. You argued with Mr. Whitcomb over financial matters. Your aunt's estate, yes?" Edward bristled. "It was only a discussion. Hardly motive enough to accuse me of murder." Poirot's eyes did not waver. "Ah, but motive is only one part. Actions and inconsistencies tell more than words. You claim to be in your room all night, yet fresh mud on the floorboards and the footprints near the study indicate otherwise. You sought to mislead, yes. Edward's jaw tightened. I merely checked on the house. I did not. Poirot raised a delicate finger. Ah, but the little gray cells, monsieur, do not lie. They notice every hesitation, every subtle discrepancy. You move carefully, yes, but for what purpose? Protection or concealment? Edward said nothing, and Poirot's gaze turned smoothly to Clara Ashcroft. Mademoiselle, he said softly, you have been observant, cautious, but not entirely innocent. You helped guard secrets about Eileen Doyle, the child she carried, and the payments that followed. You sought to protect the vulnerable, but in doing so, you have complicated the path of truth. Clara's hands trembled as she lowered her eyes. I only wanted to protect my aunt and the child. Poirot nodded. Indeed, protection is not always harmless. And yet, I see honesty here. Truth resides in your heart, even if it has been concealed. Lady Ashcroft herself was next. Poirot's gaze softened slightly, but his words were deliberate. Madame, he said, you have borne the heaviest burden of all. You knew of Patrick Ashcroft's indiscretion with Eileen Doyle. You arranged for her departure, attempted to suppress scandal, and sought to maintain your family's reputation. But the past has returned to demand payment. Your silence has allowed deception, and deception has consequences. Lady Ashcroft's hands shook as she clasped them in her lap. I did what I thought necessary. Poirot nodded. Yes, and necessity is often a heavy companion. But it does not excuse the designs of others who exploited your silence. Finally, Poirot turned his gaze toward Mrs. Kathleen Byrne. You, Madame, he said carefully, have observed, controlled, and intervened when necessary. Your loyalty is beyond question, but so is your knowledge of all the events in this house. You have guided, influenced, and in some cases withheld action. Yet even you cannot prevent the unfolding of tragedy. Mrs. Byrne's eyes met his, unwavering. I did what I could, she said. Ah, yes, Poirot said. But the subtle machinations of the guilty are never entirely hidden. I have watched, observed, and considered every movement, every hesitation, every sign of human emotion. Poirot's eyes swept across the room. He paused, allowing the tension to build. The silence became nearly unbearable. Now, he said finally, we confront the central truth of Ballycarrick Manor. Gerald Whitcomb's death was intended to silence knowledge of a terrible secret, a secret involving Eileen Doyle, a child born in concealment, and the manipulations of a man who sought to protect his own reputation at any cost. Gasps escaped from Lady Ashcroft and Clara. Edward's face darkened with a combination of anger and fear. Mrs. Byrne remained composed. Though her knuckles whitened around the edge of her chair, Poirot continued, calmly but inexorably. The murderer relied on misdirection, the locked door, the staged clues, the apparent conflicts over money. Yet, as with all deception, subtle traces remain. One cannot eliminate all evidence, no matter how clever. He paused, his gaze resting on Edward Ashcroft. Monsieur, the little gray cells revealed that you were aware of the hidden truths, that you acted in fear and frustration. But you are not the primary architect. No, the true manipulator has been among us, guiding events from the shadows, exploiting the weaknesses of others. Poirot turned once more, slowly, deliberately, to the person whose very calmness had long intrigued him, the silent observer in the room. Mrs. Byrne, you, madame, he said softly, have understood the balance of truth and concealment. You have seen who would protect, who would destroy, and who would manipulate. You alone could prevent further tragedy. And yet, the ultimate revelation rests on the combination of courage and intellect. For the first time, Mrs. Byrne's composure faltered. She exhaled and spoke, her voice low but steady. I have seen what must be done, Monsieur Poirot. I only hope it is not too late. Poirot's lips curved into a slight smile. It is never too late, madame. But one must act with precision and understanding. He gestured to all of them. Now, the final truths will be revealed. The motives, the deceptions, the fears, and the actions. Everything must be accounted for. You will hear, one by one, the parts you played in this intricate design, whether knowingly or unwittingly. And at the end, the murderer will be exposed not by chance, not by accusation, but by reason, logic, and the careful observation of human nature. The household sat, tense, waiting. Even the walls of Ballycarrick Manor seemed to lean closer, as though eager to witness the unmasking of long-buried secrets. Poirot took a deep breath. He had pieced together the psychological intricacies, the hidden manipulations, the subtle lies, and the key clues in the study, the letters, and the observations of human behavior. Now, the time had come for the truth to emerge in its full clarity. The stage was set. The moment of revelation was at hand on, and the dark secrets of Ballycarrick were finally about to be laid bare. Asterisk. Part 1 of The Dark Secret Revealed. The drawing room of Ballycarrick Manor was tense beyond description. Every eye was fixed on Hercule Poirot. The furniture, the portraits, even the faint scent of waxed wood seemed to hold their breath. Weeks of fear, suspicion, and half-truths had led to this moment. Tonight, the house itself would witness the unveiling of the murderer and the long-hidden secrets that had haunted its walls for decades. Poirot stood in the center of the room. Hands clasped, expression calm, but every inch of him alive with observation. His gaze swept the household Lady Ashcroft, pale but composed, her hands resting lightly in her lap. Clara, trembling yet alert. Edward, restless and defensive. Mrs. Kathleen Byrne, silent, a pillar of hidden strength. And the others who had become entwined in this intricate web of deceit. Poirot began softly, deliberately. "Mes amis," he said, "we are here to reconcile two matters. The crime committed upon Mr. Gerald Whitcomb, and the darkness that has lain over Ballycarrick Manor for many years. Only by revealing both can we understand the motives, the fear, and the actions that have brought us to this tragic moment." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "I will begin with the past. Many years ago, a young woman named Eileen Doyle came to Ballycarrick Manor. She was honest, gentle, and fearless in her own way. Yet she found herself entangled with Patrick Ashcroft, the late master of this house. From that union a child was conceived, a secret, hidden to protect reputations and prevent scandal. Lady Ashcroft, in her wisdom and perhaps fear, arranged for Eileen Doyle to leave, paying her for silence. But the past cannot remain buried, and neither can injustice." Lady Ashcroft's lips trembled. "It was necessary," she whispered, "to protect the family." Poirot nodded. "Yes, madame, but necessity does not remove responsibility." Eileen Doyle was silenced, and her departure did not end the danger far from it. Gerald Whitcomb discovered the truth, sought to uncover it fully, and for that reason, his life was ended. A hush fell. Edward's eyes widened. Clara's hands covered her face. Mrs. Byrne's posture remained upright, yet taut with anticipation. Poirot turned to the specific crime. Now, the murder of Mr. Whitcomb. It was not a crime of passion, nor was it opportunistic. It was deliberate, carefully staged, and designed to mislead. The locked study, the scattered papers, the misleading footprints, these were clever devices. But as with all clever plans, small inconsistencies remained. He gestured to Edward Ashcroft. "Monsieur Edward, you sought to protect the family's reputation, and perhaps yourself, but you did not commit the murder. Your agitation and minor deceptions were the red herrings that the true culprit relied upon." Edward exhaled. Almost in relief, though his composure remained brittle, Poirot's gaze then moved to Clara. "Mademoiselle Clara, your concern for the innocent, the child, the family was sincere. Your small actions to conceal letters and guard secrets were protective, not criminal. You too were an actor in this drama, but not the author of death." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "I only wanted to protect them," she whispered. "Yes, and the instinct was noble," Poirot replied gently. Finally, Poirot's attention rested on Lady Ashcroft herself. "Madame, you carried the heaviest burden of all. You knew of the past, you controlled the secrets, and you sought to maintain the stability of your family. But you did not end Mr. Whitcomb's life. Lady Ashcroft's breath caught. She nodded slowly. I did what I could, but I did not kill him. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly, his gaze flicking to Mrs. Byrne. Madame Byrne, he said, it was you who knew the movements of everyone in this house, who observed the comings and goings unnoticed, and who understood human nature with precision. You alone could arrange the circumstances to expose or conceal. But the ultimate act, the death of Mr. Whitcomb, was executed by someone driven by a mixture of fear, anger, and preservation of secrets. And that person is... He paused, letting the suspense build. Each breath in the room seemed drawn into the still air. Poirot's voice softened but carried unmistakable authority. Jonathan Kearney, the young man who had appeared suddenly weeks ago, stiffened. I don't understand, he stammered. Poirot's eyes were steady. You knew of the truth concerning Eileen Doyle, the child, and the long-hidden financial manipulation surrounding her departure. You knew that Gerald Whitcomb was close to revealing it. You acted not out of personal gain, but to prevent exposure. You killed him in the study, staging the scene to appear impossible, and leaving false clues to protect your plan. Kearney's face went pale. I only wanted to prevent scandal. I did not... Silence, monsieur, Poirot said firmly. Intent is as telling as action. You miscalculated human observation. You did not account for the careful scrutiny of the little gray cells. Your cleverness was sufficient to mislead the unobservant, but not the meticulous mind. Jonathan Kearney slumped, realizing the inevitable. Mrs. Burns stood quietly, her expression unchanged, though a shadow of relief passed across her face. She had watched the unraveling of events with restraint, ready to intervene if necessary. Poirot continued, turning back to the Ashcrofts. The murder is resolved, but the larger truth, the dark secret of Ballycarrick, must now be acknowledged. The child of Eileen Doyle and Patrick Ashcroft, hidden to preserve appearances, represents both the past and the consequences of decisions made in fear and secrecy. It is time that the family, and the manor itself, confront these truths honestly. Lady Ashcroft buried her face in her hands. Clara reached for her mother, holding her tightly. Edward looked away, conflicted, yet silent. Poirot's voice softened. We must understand that human actions, even when intended to protect, have repercussions. The past, once disturbed, can demand justice in ways unexpected and terrible. But truth, once revealed, allows for redemption, understanding, and closure. He paused, surveying the assembled faces. The house itself, he said finally, has observed your fears, your missteps, and your courage. Let it now bear witness to honesty. Let the secrets of Ballycarrick no longer fester in silence. The room remained silent for a long moment. Then Lady Ashcroft lifted her head, tears streaming, and spoke. We will face it. Together. Clara nodded. We cannot change the past, but we can honor it. Poirot smiled faintly, a rare warmth in his expression. And that, Ms. Amos, is the proper conclusion. Justice is served. The guilty are accounted for, and the dark secrets, once hidden, are now known. Outside, the fog had lifted from Ballycarrick Manor. The cliffs beyond the estate shimmered faintly in the early morning sun. The house no longer felt oppressive, nor its shadows threatening. For the first time in many years, Ballycarrick could breathe. The past had been acknowledged, the present secured, and the future, though uncertain, was free of hidden malice. Hercule Poirot, standing by the window, adjusted his immaculate mustache. His little gray cells had triumphed once more, unraveling deception, fear, and human weakness with patience and precision. He turned from the window, content that order had been restored, and that the dark secrets of Ballycarrick had finally been brought to light. The manor exhaled in silent relief, and for the first time in decades, its walls seemed lighter, its rooms brighter. Justice, subtle and measured, had been done. And Hercule Poirot, ever vigilant, knew that even in the quietest of houses, human secrets never fully disappear. They merely wait for the next careful observer to uncover them. End of The Dark Secrets of Ballycarrick.